Hey everyone! So, introductions for people who have never been to my channel before. My name is Andrew. I have been pagan for now 13 years. Just reached my anniversary. um, so, just a warning for this video, I am going to use Abrahamic religions in reference to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And in the same manner, I'm going to use the term pagan in reference to all polytheistic spiritualities. And this is just because it's simpler to have one term than continuously list all of the options. And also in like the Webster dictionary, the dictionary definition of pagan is anyone who does not follow an Abrahamic religion. But I feel like you need to actively be following a religion or spirituality in order to be considered a pagan. Like, I don't think atheists should count as pagans, you know? I don't know. That's a whole other thing. But anyway, that's how I'm going to refer to people in this video. This video is very technical, so if you can see the reflection in my glasses of like my notes on the computer, that is why. It is a very technical video. So, on to the video. As you may expect, after 13 years of being pagan, I have joined quite a few online pagan groups, mainly on Facebook, and a lot of baby pagans ask questions there because it's a safe environment, and I do my best to help. However, a question came up recently that was incredibly interesting, and I never thought of addressing it before. The question was, what is the difference between worship and work with? That is a big question, and it's a foundational question. So first we're going to look at definitions of people who use those terms, and then we can have a discussion about them. So the term worship is usually used by people in Abrahamic religions. So first we'll look at those. I looked for how the Bible defines the term worship, since it's mainly used in Abrahamic religions. Worshipdeeper.com wrote, put simply, worship is declaring the greatness of someone or something. It is the act of giving up your own glory to make sure everyone knows that the thing being worshipped is pretty awesome. To put it even more succinctly, worship is bowing down to lift up. They then went to like when the term worship was first used, and said this: the first time the word worship appears in the King James Version is Genesis 22:5, when Abraham told his servants he would go worship on the mountain with Isaac. The Hebrew word that the patriarch uses is shakah. I'm probably mispronouncing that, so any Jewish followers, please let me know how to properly pronounce that. Uses shakah, meaning to bow down. But the Hebrew word actually appears prior to this translational occurrence. The real first appearance of shakah is in Genesis 18:2. In this passage, God appears to Abraham in the desert as three people. Abraham recognized his God. In this instance, the King James translates the word more literally. It says, Abraham ran to meet them and welcomed them, bowing low to the ground. So bowing down seems to be the appropriate action when meeting with the Creator. So continuing my search led me to worshipmatters.com, and information I gathered from them states Harold Best, in his book Music Through the Eyes of Faith, defines worship in the broadest sense as acknowledging that someone or something else is greater and worth more, and by consequence to be obeyed, feared, and adored. Worship is the sign that in giving myself completely to someone or something, I want to be mastered by it. William Temple's Readings in St. John's Gospel says, worship is the submission of all our nature to God. It is the quickening of his conscience and by his holiness, the nourishment of mind with his truth, the purifying of imagination by his beauty, the opening of the heart to his love, the surrender of will to his purpose, and all of this gathered up in adoration, the most selfless emotion of which our nature is capable, and therefore the chief remedy for that self-centeredness which is our original sin and the source of all actual sin. And then lastly, Dr. Dan Block, who until recently was a professor of Old Testament at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, defines true worship as reverential human acts of submission and homage before the divine sovereign in response to his gracious revelation of himself and in accordance with his will. Putting all of these together, there are clearly common threads in these definitions and common words. We hear the terms servant, bowing, obeyed, feared, adored, the term mastered, the phrase giving myself completely, and the phrase submission of all of our nature. Lastly, submission and homage, and in accordance to his will. This way of thinking, I've found, is unique to Abrahamic religions because one of their core beliefs is God's will and God's plan. Many people use the phrase surrendering your life to Jesus and asking Jesus or God to save you. These phrases clearly connect with the concept and definitions of worship that we are seeing here. Now, the phrase work with is mainly found in pagan circles, as in I work with Hecate, I work with Vishnu. The explanation for this phrase is much longer than the explanations for defining worship, so I picked the few best ones and we're gonna address those. Pathos.com blog stated this about working with gods. They said, we work with the gods when we do their work in this world. The fact that we can work with the gods tells us something about the gods. They are not so far above us that our only option is submission, as conservative monotheists claim for their God. We may not be fully able to understand them, but we can relate to them and form relationships with them. Some argue it would be better to say we serve the gods instead of saying we work with them. Certainly what I and many other polytheists do is service, and I sometimes describe it as such. But I do not serve or even worship the gods simply because they're gods. I serve and worship them because they are worthy of that service and worship. And they are worthy of this because of what they do, not because of what they are. But when I say I work with the gods, that implies a free choice. I work with Cernunnos, Danu, the Morrigan, and others because I agree with what they're doing and I freely choose to support their work with my own work. Am I their equal? No, I'm not a god, but I am a person with my own sovereignty and agency. Besides, who would you rather have working for and with you? Slaves whose labor is forced, servants whose labor is coerced, or free people who support your values and your projects because they believe in them? I thought that was rather fantastic. We found another explanation on Quora.com, and it says, basically the simplest answer would be that it is like working with friends, family members, or ancestors, depending on the individual path and perspective. For many pagans, instead of praying and asking for God to do something for you, you talk with whatever deity and ask that they help you to do whatever you do in order to be successful. Instead of having a God that sets rules and punishes or judges you if you do not follow them, you are working with friends and inviting them to share your life, be it in good times, bad times, and for celebrations. It is understood that each deity has their own personality just as we do, and respected that each will have abilities that go beyond what is considered humanly possible, but we also recognize that we are responsible and accountable for our own lives. So we interact with chosen deities not as children which need a sort of babysitter, but rather with the attitude of an adult which is interacting with a friend that accepts us as we are. That does not always mean we will like the other person's position or attitude, or that we will always agree any more than we do with our friends, but we also respect the value of the friendship, which does go both ways. I also really loved that. The most concise definition I found came from otherworldlyoracle.com, where they say, your relationship with your god or goddess will feel like a friend or partner, but can also feel like a father or mother too. The old gods and goddesses don't need us to worship them. They have everything they need and do not require groveling. As I'm sure you can tell, there are far different keywords in these definitions. The keywords and phrases here are relationship, service, support, family, friends, invite. So now let's discuss this. First, let's admit it, a lot of pagans have a Christian upbringing. Very rarely are people raised pagan. So when pagans are trying to describe their definitions, we compare them to a Christian definition because that's what the majority of people will know, whether or not you're Christian. So those terms, while simpler and more concise, are less accurate to what we believe we are doing. Pagans don't look at their gods and goddesses and say, they're better than me. So in order to succeed, I must follow these rules and instructions. And by doing so, I'm contributing to the plan. That's like having the hive mind of the BORG.
Resistance is futile.
And then when you start to feel better and like relieved, like a lot of people say they do after Jesus saves them, in my opinion, because your worries are now out of your hands, so you don't need to make those decisions on your own. God is making them. And as long as you go along, you'll be contributing to God's plan and God's will. You start to react like,
I wish to assimilate more information.
You've assimilated enough for one day.
the benefit of paganism is that all spiritualities are polytheistic. As we said above, we're able to choose who to ask for advice because we support their values and want to help put those in the world. Abrahamic religions, there's one voice, one path, yet many interpretations of it, hence all of the denominations. So here's generally what we've learned. The key words in definitions for worship are submission, mastered, and obey. And the key words in the definitions of work with is service, support, family, and friends. I want to end this video by saying this. Some pagans do worship their deities. Some Christians do work with Jesus or God. My sister works with Jesus. She's a non-denominational Christian and has a relationship with Jesus similar to the way that I have a relationship with Persephone. And regardless of the different spiritual paths that we're on, we both are following the same type of values, loving people and helping people. Jesus called her to be a childcare specialist in a big hospital, and Persephone has called me to be a counselor. My mom, on the other hand, worships God. She follows it, in my opinion, rather blindly. She has the mentality of God's word says this, I interpret it this way, so this. And I just can't fathom how that's okay. I just wholeheartedly disagree with that mindset. That doesn't seem like free will to me, which is something that's foundational in every religion and every spirituality, which is where a piece of that pathos definition kind of comes into play, where they said, who would you rather have working for you? Slaves whose labor is forced, servants whose labor is coerced, or free people who support your values? Christians don't believe they're forced because God gave them free will to believe and follow him or not. However, many Christians do say, I'm a servant of the Lord, and holding eternal damnation over your head is as like a punishment for not making the decisions that he would have wanted you to make. Kind of sounds like coercion to me. I'd rather have a disagreement with a friend and not follow their advice than have to beg forgiveness from someone who could put me in hell. I just can't fathom how that's healthy, how that's mentally healthy. And I also agree with what we found in that otherworldly oracle definition, where they said they don't need us to worship them. They have everything they need and don't require groveling. So what are your thoughts between the phrases of work with and worship? Which do you identify with, or maybe you prefer a different phrase? And if so, please let me know what it is in the comments, because I really want to know. Also, Ancient Wellness is expanding. I now have a website and an Etsy shop. Those links are below, as well as the links to all of the articles that I have mentioned, so you can read them for yourself and kind of let me know in the comments what you get from them. So yeah, have a good day, everybody.